Hey, I'm Catherine Devine. I'm a journalist, a law student, and a member of Gen Z.
And I'm Dean Charles. I'm your old school businessman and resident boomer. And if you want to know what's going on, this is the place. So let's get to it.
So, today we're going to talk about the concept of taxing the rich, which has been pretty prominent in the news with California's recent ballot initiative. And what are your initial thoughts?
Well, taxing the rich is something that probably should happen, and we should probably figure out ways to do it in a moderate slash conservative manner, even though and not just haphazardly tax the rich. Because I can tell you, I've just been in business for a long time. I was a businessman. I've known a lot of wealthy people, and wealthy people don't mind paying their fair share of taxes. I can honestly tell you that. They just don't want it to be spent poorly. They want it to be spent wisely. They want to know the money's going towards the right things. And that just doesn't happen in many places anymore. And especially if you look at New York City and New York in general and California and LA specifically and San Francisco. Some of the bigger cities in the country just don't spend their money wisely. And that's the problem the wealthy have. I know Jamie Dimon has talked about it for a long time. How if you just spent your money better, no one would care. But you look at things like, some basic things that people complain about all the time, whether it's schools, like, why do we give you more money, but the schools don't get better, right? How about roads and bridges? How come they're not redone? And we give you money. How come the roads and bridges and the infrastructure doesn't get better, right? How come it's not kept up? And why do you even feel scared when you're going across some roads and bridges, right? Like they're going to collapse or something. You're not always given a sense of confidence, right? Spend more on public transportation isn't there. Public transportation is a problem in a lot of cities around America. I mean, when you look around the world and you see public transportation and how far other cities in the rest of the world have come, especially with trains and even buses, and America's pretty far behind, way, way behind. And I don't even know how they catch up. LA's never caught up, and New York, their train system's 100 years old, and it's so expensive. They've made it so expensive to fix anything. So then you just see a lot of money being, a lot of corruption, and corruption goes from all the way from the bottom to the top, being the White House, right? And the corruption is something you see on a daily basis, and maybe we can have a talk about human nature, because as a boomer, I'm going to say I've seen human nature in action for much longer, obviously, right? And when it comes to money, human nature is a funny thing. So one day we can have a discussion about that. But that's what the wealthy people are thinking about, in my opinion. That's my experience. And I say it myself. I go, God, I guess I'd pay more taxes if I knew it was being spent well. You don't want to see the corruption, and you don't want to see people having trouble accessing the things that they need to have. Where I live, there are some nice things. There's really nice parks. They're kept up well, right? People, a lot of people play sports on these parks. The kids, they go and play. The things like that are good. You don't mind paying for stuff like that. So, I don't know. What's the Gen Z look?
It's interesting that you bring that up because I was wondering if Gen Z and older generations kind of come to the same conclusion but through different means, because I do think that probably younger generations support propositions similar to California's initiative,
Right.
primarily due to a severe cost of living crisis, like being disproportionately affected by housing unaffordability, like high student debt, that makes like concentrated wealth feel like a barrier to social
Right.
mobility.
Especially social media is making people feel that way too.
For sure. So I think that's the angle that probably younger generations tend to approach it from. So I do wonder, like you bring up a really good point where I do think that a sort of pernicious distrust in institutions works against anything like this ever actually passing the poll of public opinion, because if people are distrustful of how it's going to be spent, and with government distrust in institutions at an all-time high, I don't know if people would be confident that their taxpayer dollars would actually go towards all these things that you're talking about, like school, works, infrastructure.
Most people want police, and you want the ambulance to come to your house if you're sick, right? And those are things that people really when push comes to shove, you're going to want. The socialists kind of are trying to promote something else, and they don't. This is the problem when the boomer view of socialism. What you think you want, and what you really want, could be two different things. And I don't think younger kids get it. And I know you're going to say, "Oh, boomer," but it's true. There's certain things that people want, people need, and that's what government should be taking care of. Mainly health and welfare and fun and creating an environment where people can go and have fun and feel safe and still provide opportunity, all the basic things, right? But young kids say, "Oh, tax the rich, tax the rich." What, to just pay for you? Like I don't I understand, like I guess the problem is I don't see kids struggling as much as they say they are. Like from my perspective, when I walk around, when I travel, when I see, the younger generation, I don't see anyone struggling. I see every one of them with a phone, a computer, nice clothes, I'll go out to dinner, what I think is a fairly, not a high-end place, but a medium type restaurant. And there's no shortage of young people there, Whereas when I was in my 20s, I hate to sound like the guy like, "Oh, I traveled 5 miles up the hill to get to school, I had to walk in the snow and the blizzard," like that's what my generation was like, you heard stories like, "I walked 5 miles in this," and I hate to sound like that, but I'm like, I didn't go out to restaurants when I was in my 20s and I was working. I had 3 jobs. I lived in New York City when I got out of college. And, you know, I hung out with my friends. We were lucky if we could get a case of beer, and hang out, right? And we ate ramen, and once in a while there was a place called Chirping Chicken around the corner from where I lived. It's still there, I think, and that was a pretty good deal. So once a week we'd go there, like things like that. Like it wasn't we didn't have excesses. We tried to save money, and it was expensive. New York was just as expensive when I was there in the '80s as it is now, in my opinion.
So I have two trains of thought. One is there's a concept called doom spending that people use a lot in reference to Gen Z's economic habits. And it's basically this concept that Gen Z like heavily prioritizes spending on like experiences like eating out, like travel, festivals, and they dedicate a much larger share of their budget than other generations, which is not super responsible. But I think that the label doom spending kind of tells you what you need to know about that. That it's coming more from this feeling that saving is sort of futile because like what am I gonna like a
What are you
home saving for
saving
a
for?
home seems so out
Yeah.
of reach. So what's the point? And I also think that there are a lot more ways that you can finance
Yeah, the
purchases,
financing is yeah, there's tons of financing
the buy
options.
now pay laters.
Yeah,
Those platforms have made it so
yeah,
easy to make
yeah, that's
purchases without
right.
actually having cash flow, which I think is really predatory.
It's not cheap. It's not cheap to buy now, pay later. Some people say, "Oh, we'll give you free interest for a year," but then the year comes up, and then it's like 30% interest. I don't even know. No, the buy now, pay later, and the credit cards and the all the different options for financing that you have is terrible. There's no question about it. And I understand wanting to have fun. The old saying, who said it? Mark Twain, "Youth is wasted on the young," because basically you can't, you can't afford it, right? You can't afford to have the fun that you want. Most kids. So now the trouble is kids now, I guess because of social media, Gen Z is looking at the internet, and it looks like everyone's wealthy and everyone's a billionaire, even not even a millionaire. Like it's really weird concept that everyone's a billionaire now except for me. They're looking at it and going, everyone's a billionaire except for me. Everybody has money except for me. So I guess that's where this all comes from, or a lot of it. Tell me if I'm wrong. That's my impression anyway. That's my impression, that everybody's looking at it and saying, "God, why isn't that me?" And then a lot of the people are just faking it too. You just think they are. They're like putting on a show to try and create money for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few thoughts. One is I think the cost of goods is a lot cheaper now than it was when you were growing up because of globalization, production, all that stuff.
I
You
could
can
really get
order.
into that topic because that was my business. And I can tell you that in the '80s, yes, but then Walmart popped up, right? I'll give a brief explanation.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Okay. So, Walmart popped up, and Walmart spread fairly fast. And you could see it in the industry that I was in. at the time in the 80s, I was a salesman in that industry, and in the garment, basically in the garment and textile business, right? And there was ancillary businesses that support it, but there was a time when most of the manufacturing was done in the United States for clothing. Let's just use clothing as an example, because if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is food, clothing, and shelter, right? Three basic things of life. So just in the clothing business, most of the manufacturing was done in the United States, but old Sam Walton, in his infinite wisdom, decided to start manufacturing anywhere in the world, really anywhere in the world where he could get something even 10 cents cheaper. The thing he did though is he passed the savings on to the consumer, right? And that's how Walmart grew. That's how they got so big. And you're talking about all the things that people would despise right now, all the young people would despise, slave labor, child labor. I mean, people are making things for nothing in other countries, literally nothing. People are getting paid 5, 10 cents an hour to make goods, right? And Walmart was built on that. And then these other big store, big stores followed suit, Target, Kmart, Sears, they all, at that time, now you have Best Buy and Home Depot and all these other stores and other industries that do the same thing. I mean, but what that also did is it brought on an evolution of cheap goods like the 99-cent store, right? So let's use the 99-cent store as an example, because that became a big popular store. I knew the guy that owned the very first the actual 99-cent store. Dave Gold was his name, and he and the 99-cent store became extremely successful. And what I saw, and this is sort of my opinion, is that people were able to like pick and choose what items they wanted to spend money on and what items they didn't want to spend money on. And so you could go to the 99-cent store and say you wanted to buy a brush for 99 cents or toothpaste, or this transferred to even Walmart and a lot of the big box stores. You can pick and choose what items you need and how much you want to pay for them. Or if you wanted, name brand clothes, or if you wanted, cheap clothes, right? Because you could wear, you have to have, a $150 Louis Vuitton, whatever, and or do you want to go to the 99-cent store and get something, or Walmart and get something for like 1/50th of the price, right? You can decide. But you can decide, okay, I want to pay for this, but I don't want to pay for this. And I think that really helped the economy a lot. And now Trump's come in with his tariffs and kind of eliminated that. So you don't have the opportunity to go buy cheap stuff because of the tariffs. There's a tax on it, right? There's a tax. I always call it cheap shit. People want cheap shit, and from China. I always say that. People love cheap shit from China. And the ability to buy cheap shit from China. But the tariffs have kind of taken that away. I see it happening, and it's pissed people off more. That's my opinion anyway. That's a very short summary.
I was going to comment on that as well, that I feel like there's definitely going to be a post-tariff shift. But I
Yeah,
know
no question.
that, so you were mentioning stores like Sears, Walmart, like those big box retailers.
Yeah,
I think
Target.
they're Target. There's another, I think, grouping of stores that sell cheap consumer goods that are all based in China, like Temu, Shine, or Shein. I'm
Right.
not sure how to pronounce it.
Yeah,
That I think
yeah,
is really popular, especially for the younger generations, and they
yeah.
advertise
Yeah, I've seen
like
them.
crazy on TikTok.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen them. I've seen them. Yeah.
yeah. And I think a lot of times when you see people on social media who are appearing to live these luxurious lifestyles, I do think a lot of times it's sourced from Temu or
Yeah, right.
it's like a
Yeah,
10
yeah,
cent thing
no,
that's gonna fall apart in a set
right.
in a
And those things are still made with slave labor, child labor, underpaid labor, whatever you want to call it, sweatshops, however you want to term it. That stuff's still made that way. And these people are like, so against that, but then they'll go buy it from there. That's hypocrite. We can talk about Trump and making money in office. That's definitely hypocritical and shouldn't happen. But when the younger people who are so against the slave wages or being underpaid and not appreciated, whatever you want to call the younger generation, how they're looking at it, that's no different though. you're buying it from China, you're trying to get it cheap, and there's those people that are making it are still, there's no question about it. They're underpaid, they're using child labor, they're using slave labor, they're using whatever means they have to get that done. And it's all the way through the system. There's a whole, from start to finish, it's a whole long production line from start to finish of most goods, right? I mean, even if you're dealing in clothes, so the person that designs it, the pattern makers, the cutters, the sewers, where does the fabric come from? The fabric has to be made, it has to be dyed, right? It has to be or printed on whatever you're doing with the fabric. You have to make the pockets, you have to make there's a process to everything. Then once it's even finished, there's a long process to finish it. It has to be packaged and shipped and sent out. I mean, and that's a whole nother process. Even loading it on the boat's a process. Loading it off the boat's a process, right? So you're talking about cheap labor all the way around, right?
I guess how I feel about this is similar to how I feel about making like eco-friendly decisions. I'm hesitant to put the onus too much on the consumer because I do think overconsumption is an issue, but I do think that when given the choice between a expensive good or a moderately priced good and a very cheaply priced good, I think especially with a country in a country without a robust social safety net, I can understand why someone would always go with the cheaper option, especially with a sort of doom forecasting mentality. So I
Well,
do
yeah, for doing, I'm just saying,
I think it's hypocritical, but I think that's where the government should step in. And this goes out like this is now like political theory where it's like what's the government's role in people's lives. And I do
right.
think that that's where government regulation should step in and should say find some way to like mediate this tension between like unethical practices and lowering costs.
The global economy definitely lowered costs, right?
Yeah.
It lowers costs, the global economy, because people are willing to work cheaper in other places, or they have to work cheaper. And the amount of consumption, you can't believe it until you see it. And even when you see it, you can't see the whole thing. The amount of goods that has to be made in the world to produce enough goods for the entire 8.5 billion people in the world is overwhelming in some ways. It's hard to even picture it. It's hard to understand it. I don't think most people do, right? Because you just live in your own little world, right? And it's so, when you're talking about the global economy, you're talking about mass producing goods and electronics and everything that people need to survive right now. It's overwhelming to even see it. I'm amazed. It even amazes me that we're able to make that much shit. Like, there's so much stuff made that it's hard to picture that the earth has those kind of resources, but it does, And
Yeah.
so how do you get everybody to survive economically off of it? That's a tough one. And it sort of works. And I don't think people realize how good they have it in America. I guess that's my point, is I don't think people realize how good they have it here. They were born into something. Just by being born in the United States, you're being born into something that's way better than 3/4 of the world. And then Gen Z's complaining about it. I guess that's what bugs people the most. And when you say, tax the rich, it's like, you don't realize how good you have it. You have the opportunity, if you wanted, to maybe become a billionaire. It's a long shot or do well. And you want to throw that away? You don't want to find that maybe it's getting a little stale and we need new thoughts and new ways to do it, but you really want to throw that away for something else that's been proven not to work? Because, you should go take some trips to places around the world and see how that works. I guess that's how a lot of people, not just guys, men and women, boomers feel. That's what they're looking at. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I guess I have two comments. One is, and this is sort of related to what you were saying about feeling like everyone views everyone else as a billionaire, but themselves
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
less than. And I think that's like there was a psych study, don't remember the title, but that addressed this concept where you evaluate your own like happiness in relation to financial security relatively.
Right.
So people who wealthiest people relative to their neighborhood felt the most happy with their financial status. So that means if let's say you made 50K, but everyone in your neighborhood made 20K,
Feel
then
good.
you're
Yeah.
feeling so good. But then if you made 50K, but everyone in your neighborhood made 100K, you're going to feel so poor. And I wonder
Right.
if,
Right.
because
That's true. I've read that study. I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
And I wonder if because of social media, the our sort of the comparison group is now broader and wider and more open. So it's like no matter what, you're always going to be able to find so many people who are over your head. And so I
Right.
wonder if that kind of sets you up for failure in a way.
Right. I think it does. I think it totally does. I think that you're right on target. I even saw in my life from my 20s into my 60s where you live, and if everybody's doing this about the same as you, everything's good, or maybe some people a little above or a little below, everything's good. But if somebody all of a sudden pops and moves to another level, they start feeling superior, you start feeling like they feel superior. It's just sort of human nature. There's a lot of things happen in life that it happens over and over again. It's human nature. It's kind of weird. And money, especially when it comes to money, because money is sort of a drug, right? I don't know how else to put it, but you know, it affects your emotions when somebody, you know, all of a sudden somebody can do something you can't. Some people don't care, but a lot of people do. It's exactly what you were talking about, though. If you live in a neighborhood that's the same socioeconomic, you know, level, and you know maybe you know even a little above or below, nobody really knows, right? Unless you are really open about it, but not many people are open about it. One thing I always say is, there's one thing I know about other people's money. You know what that is?
What?
I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
When it
that,
comes to other people's money, I don't know, and I know what. Usually, I don't want to know, but some people do want to know, but I don't know.
yeah.
People lie. People say people say they're. You see it on. That's what I'm talking about online. People say, "Oh, look at me, I'm rich, blah blah blah. I got all this. Look at what I got." I mean, that's what a lot of the internet's like. They don't have anything. They're just trying to, portray themselves like that because maybe if they portray themselves like that, they could make it. I don't know. People have
Yeah,
that
maybe
attitude.
fake it till you
I
make
know.
it, I guess. Yeah.
Fake it
I
till you make
am,
it. Exactly.
yeah.
It's funny.
I'm honestly surprised that you're supportive of, taxing the top 1%, however you want to phrase it.
I think the billionaires are fine
But,
with it as long as they know the money's going to the right place. They just don't want waste. I mean, Jamie Dimon's the guy that got the most press for saying it,
mhm.
but I hear it all the time, right? People say it all the time. I've heard guys like Mark Cuban say it, and Mr. Wonderful say it, and obviously Jamie Dimon. There's lots of guys that you hear say it. A lot of the businessmen, if you watch CNBC, you'll see guys come on and say it all the time. Like, where's the money going? Like, sure, taxes, but how's it going to help? What are you going to do to help? And you have the politicians who, number one, you need term limits. If you're going to pull that off, you need term limits. People have to want to go into politics because they want to help, not because they want to enrich themselves. And you can see it from top to bottom. Trump's probably made more money in office than any president ever. And the way he was bagging on Hunter Biden and everything is so hypocritical to me. And when it comes to Trump, there's policies. I'm going to say when I like something and when I don't like something. I mean, I've never been a big fan of Trump, but there's some policies I'm in favor of with Trump. And I mean, I've never really been a Republican, but I've always kind of been a moderate. And I'm like, well, that makes more sense. Trump enriching himself like he has in office is just hypocritical and awful. No one should be allowed to do that. It doesn't matter if it's the president or the lowest congressman or the city, a mayor of a small city but it happens all the time. Some of it's human nature. You get into power and power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Isn't that the old saying? You can say Trump is closing in on that, So
Yeah. Well, there's that Thomas Jefferson quote that's like, if serving in an elective office ever becomes a career, then corruption will follow. That's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
probably not the verbatim quote, but no, I mean, I was thinking about that as well, especially with all the like Todd Blanche stuff that's been
Right.
happening
Yeah,
recently.
yeah. That's crazy stuff. I don't.
So crazy, like all the information about it's like 1.78 billion dollar anti-weaponization fund that was established as part of this settlement with Trump to end his lawsuit against the IRS over his leaked returns. And Blanche says that like the fund is dead, but who knows? But also part of the settlement um, was protection for Trump, his family, and his businesses from IRS audits of past tax returns, which is just this like insane level of corruption, it's like third world
Yeah,
country
yeah, and
level
yeah,
corruption. That is just like how could anyone expect that their taxpayer dollars are being used for what they're say they're
right.
being
So
used for,
you
and then
have
when stuff
Trump
like
on
this
one
comes
side,
out in
you
the
have Trump
news.
at the top, and then you have what happened in Minnesota with, and California with, I guess it was hospice care, right? People were opening up hospices and collecting money, and there was nobody in there. And also preschools, right? Hospices and preschools with the preschools had no kids and the hospices have no patients, but yet they're getting paid. That's just the tip of the tip of the iceberg. Because I've seen it. I've seen people do crazy stuff for money. And like I said, it gets to be an addiction. Some people are addicted. Addiction can cause it. Just survival can do it too. Just wanting to survive. But addiction can cause people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. Making money and living a certain lifestyle and not being able to keep it up can cause people to do things they wouldn't normally do. And these are things I've seen over and over in my life. And people walk the line all the time, and they people, businessmen of all, levels of business always are thinking, how can we not pay taxes? How can we fuck the IRS? And people come up with a lot of ways. Concept of comes from because nobody feels like their money's well spent, and they'd rather have it. So like, I'm not giving it to the government. No, I'm going to figure out ways by hook or by crook how not to give it to the government, right? So these are human flaws that need to be worked on, all the way around.
Yeah. What do you think about the argument that, this is something that Gavin Newsom has been saying that taxing the wealthy will push the wealthy out of the state and therefore, I don't know,
Yeah, I think it's terrible.
economic prosperity will follow with them.
Right. I think they need to figure out ways to spend the money wisely, and then they won't leave.
Mm.
Like if you're just going to tax us, and if you live in New York City, you're just going to tax us to death, right? Tax us more, and you know there's still going to be you're still going to have a huge homeless problem. You're going to have a huge crime problem. You're going to have dirty streets, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience to get around anymore. And you're not, the kids aren't going to school, kids aren't learning, education's terrible. The police, you don't have enough money to pay enough police. You have firemen, ambulances. If you look around and you see that, the subway still looks as dirty as they did 50 years ago, nothing's really changed, then yeah, why am I going to stay? But if that money was being spent and it was a beautiful city, if it looked like Dubai, everyone would stay. No one would care, right?
Yeah.
And that's my opinion, and that seems to be the opinion of a lot of the wealthy people, right? New York City certainly doesn't look like Dubai, you know.
Yeah, and when there's so many tax loopholes as well, then the brunt of the taxation always falls on the middle class, the middle of the pack, because I think wealthier people are able to leverage certain tax loopholes,
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
whatever. And so then it's
they
like, then you
still, you know,
feel even more disillusioned.
they still pay some what's the percentage of taxes that the wealthy pay in New York? It's still, 40 or 50 or more, 60% of the tax base is the wealthy. I forget the number. It's a really high number is paid by the wealthy.
But here's the thing, and this is just anecdotal, but I do know a lot of people in New York who should be paying a very high tax burden to the city and the state. But what they do is that they claim their residency elsewhere and they game their like time spent in the city. So they're just under
Yeah, yeah,
the
under six
like,
months. Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
so
Yeah, you have to be
I don't,
just under 6 months. Yeah, yeah, they
yeah.
do that, in every state that doesn't have a tax. People have a house and they claim residency there, whether it's Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Nevada. These are states with no, where you claim your residency for just over 6 months. You say you're there, even if you're not, and you don't have to pay taxes, and you can live somewhere else the rest of the time.
Yeah. And I don't
But
think that's
yeah,
fair.
but
I
well,
don't
that's
think
why
that's
that's
fair.
why New
Yeah.
York Mondami wanted to put in the, what do you call it, the Pierre de
Pied pied
yeah,
terre.
pied
Yeah,
de terre
tax.
tax. For if you have a second home, you're going to get taxed on it, just on that home. So so that's reasonable in some respects because people are, trying to pay less taxes, but that's what they're causing. I still say it's the same effect though. If California, and I heard Joe Rogan saying this yesterday. he was Joe Rogan had JD Vance on, and they were talking about California. And I felt the same way when I moved there. He said, when I moved to California, he moved there in the 90s. I moved there in the 80s, right? When I moved to California, it was cool. Like, I loved it. LA was a great city. Seriously, like a great city. There was so much to do, so much, so much energy, and there's you could go to the beach and it was really cool. You go out to Big Bear to the mountains and it's really cool. You could go to Hollywood, it was really cool. You could go to West LA, it was really cool. West Hollywood was really cool. There's so many, the restaurants and the culture and just, it was so much fun. But the traffic always sucked. The biggest problem is the traffic always sucked. That got to be expensive because when I moved there, it was not expensive. It wasn't as expensive. And they've just ruined it, like downtown he's talking about Skid Row. Like it's like 50 blocks wide or something now or something. It's awful. I mean, I haven't been there in a while, but the homelessness and the drugs and I think I was telling you I have a friend whose kids went to Pali High, Pacific Palisades High School. They call it Pali High. And after the fires, because Pali High gets burned down, the high school was at a place in Santa Monica or West LA, I forget, on Olympic Boulevard, I think. And when they would go pick up their kids at this high school, they couldn't tell the difference between the kids and the homeless people. They said it was so awful, so bad. I think they're still there, I mean, so that's what you're dealing with in LA. And it's terrible. I mean, LA's gone it's so downhill, so much traffic. So I don't know, but if they kept it up, it's old. I mean, I always joke about how it could use a paint job. A lot of the cities in this country could just use some paint, Like if I was the mayor of some of these cities, I'd be like, the first thing I'd be doing is going to one of the paint companies like Sherwin-Williams or something and saying, hey, let's make a deal on paint. So everyone in the city can go get some paint and paint their house and their property, whatever. Because I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, it has really surprised me because Philadelphia is on that like northeast corridor between DC and Boston. That's like one of the most
Yeah,
prosperous corridors in the nation. But
yeah,
Philly has just been like so underinvested in, I think, for a while
yeah.
that
Well, to
it
me,
is.
like I a couple years ago, I drove from Boston down to Philly. Actually, I drove to Baltimore. I went Boston to Baltimore, and because I have some relatives in Baltimore and Boston and Baltimore and Philly, and I that's when I started joking about how the East Coast could use a paint job. Like you drive from Boston and you go through Providence. Providence could use a paint job. You drive through like Connecticut, and that's where I grew up and could use a paint job. Like you go through New Haven, you get down to New York. New York, oh my God. You drive through Bronx, Queens, whatever, or into New Jersey, and you're like, man, or if you fly into JFK or something, and you head north. I mean, that whole I call it AOC land. I mean, it hasn't changed since I was a kid. 50, 60 years ago between and it looks the same. It hasn't even gotten a paint job. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a lot more investment in like all these communities and cities.
Yeah.
And going back to Skid Row, I think a huge issue with Skid Row is the under investment in mental illnesses and severe like addiction
Well, yeah, of course.
in the city. So it's like I guess this is where would taxpayer dollars and an increase in taxpayer dollars give you the biggest bang for your buck? Maybe in
It
like
has, it
situations
has,
like this,
right.
because
And it
it's
has to
just
be efficient. It has to be efficient too, because I've tried to help the homeless. I had a warehouse in downtown LA for years and years, right? For a long time. And there was always homeless people around. And so you try to help them, you try to give them jobs. And I had this homeless couple that I helped as an example. And they were addicted to drugs, and drugs makes you do crazy things. And so they spent their time working, but then they were also figuring out how to break in on the weekends. And so they break in on the weekends and steal because they needed drugs so bad, I guess. And so what the common guy tries to do isn't going to help. And that's why people are now like, all right, well, why don't I just buy you 6 packs instead of giving you the money, and because they know that's what they want it for, or whatever, a bottle of booze or some food, or hand somebody some food. And the mental illness, so there's a combination, and sometimes both mental illness, addiction, and sometimes both. And it's really, there's no good services for it. No one can afford to go into rehab. And even rehab doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't, people wind up back in rehab. People who can afford rehab wind up back in rehab all the time. Addiction is really, really bad. And, it's something that I do praise Trump for, honestly, because fentanyl especially, and a lot of the drugs, there's definitely less fentanyl in the country and less drugs, less cocaine in the United States right now than there was before Trump took office. And that is something I always said, why won't some president stop this? Like it shouldn't be that hard to stop. And Trump's the first one in my lifetime to really try to take a stand and do that. And I can tell you fentanyl deaths are down all over the country. You can look at the stats. So that's something that I am, happy that Trump did. But drugs and alcohol, we still as a nation have not come up with great ways to help the mentally ill and the drug addicted and the addiction, not just drugs, but addiction in general. Because there's drugs, there's gambling's proliferated everywhere. So, there's so many kids that are addicted to gambling now. And so you have drugs, gambling, alcohol, and all kinds of other stuff too.
Well, I was going to say there was the harm mitigation strategy that San Francisco tried to use to curb drug use,
Yeah,
where
that didn't
but
work
it
for me.
obviously had pretty suboptimal results.
Results, yeah.
So I think now that they're pivoting more towards, instead of like a tolerance first policy, towards
Yeah.
stricter enforcement and mandatory treatment, which I think has been serving them well, but I think maybe too soon to draw any like full conclusions. But I think there is a decent drop in the fatal overdoses, but that also could be because of other less fentanyl
Yeah.
or more naloxone. But yeah, I think you bring up gambling as an issue. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kalshi app, but the Kalshi app is
Calci.
this Kalshi,
Calci.
yeah.
Yeah, Calci. There's
Yeah.
another one too, Polymarket. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's two of
Polymarket,
them.
Kalshi. I see
Yeah.
them advertised
Oh yeah, I've
everywhere
looked at
now.
them. I've checked them out.
Yeah.
You can bet on
Well,
anything.
you can bet on anything, including reality TV,
Yeah.
song releases. I feel like that and buy now, pay later, maybe not the best
Well,
combo
people
for.
cheat. So what was I just the woman who puts Trump's speeches on the teleprompter?
Yeah, I saw this.
She was betting on on Kalshi because she read the speech. She's putting it up there, and then she knows what he's going to say, so she can bet on it. I mean, it's crazy. And the guy that when they took down Maduro, one of the SEAL team guys made a huge bet on taking down Maduro, right? I mean, so yeah, so if you have inside information, I don't know, that's something that needs to be addressed, And the
Yeah.
whole way, we'll have to talk about it another time. How that whole form of gambling came about was because the government allowed it, and we'll get into that another time.
Yeah. One, Trump's assistant betting on betting
Yeah,
on his speech. How could you think you wouldn't get caught?
yeah.
One, two. I
Well,
remember
I
back
don't.
in
I'm
April.
surprised she did get caught. Are you kidding me? Well, how did
Oh,
she
you
get caught?
think?
Yeah, how
I
did she
mean, it
get
was
caught?
she won $100,000. I feel like it's fair to
I know,
audit.
but why did she do it? Why didn't she call a friend and say, "Hey, bet on keep going"?
She,
She could have called 10 friends and said, "Bet this on
yeah,
Calci or
not
Polymarket."
condoning it,
You know what
but
I mean? Like she was
she
stupid to
should have
get caught.
buried the lead. Yeah, you
The
could have
thing
tried
is,
to bury the lead a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it's how stupid are you that you just do it yourself and get caught? You do it in a way where you get caught. I don't. That's ridiculous to me. Like
Yeah,
if I had
but
inside information and I would go down for it, I'd have someone else do it. I don't know. That's just I don't know. But that's another story. Also, something I've seen in human nature over the years. You take a poor person and make them a rich person, they're going to act just like what they hated. 9 out of 10 times. There's not many. What's Jeff Bezos' wife, right? There's not many what was her name? Do you know Jeff? Remember, she's given away like 26 billion already.
I saw
You
that.
know who I'm talking about?
I
Jeff
do. What's her
Bezos'
name?
ex-wife. Oh yeah,
Mackenzie Scott.
Mackenzie Bezos, right? Mackenzie Scott. There's not many. Mackenzie Scott's an anomaly. There's not many Mackenzie Scotts in the world. Seriously, I haven't seen it. There's some, and Mackenzie Scott obviously is one of them. And a lot of people, and then so she's given a tremendous amount of her fortune away, like 30, might be 35 billion she's given away. And the trouble is a lot of the places she's giving it to may not be ethical themselves, right? A lot of charitable organizations don't run that ethically. I mean, if you really look into a lot of them, some do and some don't. And I'm sure she's doing her due diligence to the best of her ability. But my point is, there's not that many Mackenzie Scotts in the world. There just aren't. And who's just going to give it away? So, because they feel a lot of people feel they can do it better than anyone else. And in fact, it's the opposite. You go from poor and you're in the struggle, and then you get the money. You act just like the people that you hated before. Now you are them. That's much more common, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think people get corrupted by power. I was
Yeah,
listening to this like podcast episode earlier today about Lindsey Graham, and
yeah,
how, and it was old friend of Lindsey Graham was sort of reflecting on the Lindsey Graham that he knew, though they hadn't spoken in the past decade. And I think he was really surprised to see the sort of turn that Lindsey Graham took later on in his career. And he was, obviously this is all conjecture, and I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but he was hypothesizing that Lindsey probably wasn't super aligned with what he was doing, but probably thought, let me just get ahead, and then like I'll be able to do some PR cleanup, do some cleanup. It's like there was no later on, and so I think that's sad, and like you can generalize that notion to so many different
yeah.
topics,
Well, yeah,
themes,
yeah.
etc.
People can rationalize anything, is what I think what you're saying.
Hmm.
Rationalization is a big, part of human nature. I've seen people rationalize so many things, and we could do like 10 episodes on what people will rationalize, what they have the ability to rationalize. Like, oh, that doesn't fit here when it truly fits, right? And so I don't know, but that's what you're saying, Lindsey Graham. He was rationalizing, trying to get into a place where he actually could help later, right? So he's
I mean,
rationalizing
that's a theory. We're not
yeah,
sure,
it's a
but
theory. Yeah, yeah.
perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everyone thinks he's closeted, right? He was a closeted gay
Yeah.
man. That's what everyone feels, and they've been saying that for years and years, so it's probably true. I don't see why that wouldn't be true, but yeah, I mean, that. It doesn't nothing like that surprises me.
Mm-mm.
Nothing that's happening surprises me, right? It's just like, well, can we figure out a way to make it right or make it wrong, right? Or move forward? Is there a way to turn New York City into Dubai, or create another Dubai in the United States? I'm not saying Dubai like a new, brand new futuristic city that people are proud to live in and pay taxes and live there, right? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying let's move Dubai here. I'm trying to say
Yeah.
let's build a futuristic city that's beautiful, that has business, that's clean, that's safe, that people want to live in, that they're like, wow, this is the greatest place. But I don't know if it's possible.
Maybe we need to like strike oil or something. I
Yeah, we don't
just,
have to strike oil in the United States. You just have to spend the money better. you
oh,
know?
yeah. I mean, it is interesting because this is, in a way, there is a lot of bipartisan agreement on getting more taxpayer dollars from certain income brackets. Because
Yeah.
even like Mitt Romney, he had this quote in his New York Times essay. It was called Tax the Rich Like Me. And he said, like we have reached a point where any mix of solutions to our nation's economic problems is going to involve having the wealthiest Americans contribute more. And then you have like Mamdani on the other across the aisle, proposing increasing the income tax rate from 3.9% to 5.9% on income over $1 million. So this is a sort of one of those rare issues where there's a lot of overlap, but it is just sort of like, how do you put this into
Right.
practice?
Right. It's about how you're going to spend the money. That's
Yeah.
plain and simple. How are you going to spend the money? How does that money get spent? What's the responsibility of the rich and the poor? The poor have a responsibility too. They have a responsibility to try hard and go to work. And if you're going to take advantage of the things that government has to offer, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're just not freeloading. And that's where I think a big problem comes into play. And it's the responsibility of other people to say, hey, you're freeloading, get your ass to work, whatever it is. And even if you're somewhat disabled, there's got to be it helps your psyche to do some kind of work. Just do something, even if it's volunteering or whatever. I mean, that's why older people volunteer, because it just helps your psyche to do something, right? Nobody sitting at home doing nothing, even if you're disabled, is really hard. and no matter what unless you truly can't get out of bed. I mean, there's people that are just so sick they can't get out of bed. That's a different story. But these are all topics that we can spend hours on. So why don't we wrap it up for today? We've crossed a lot of bridges ourselves here today. I'd like to hear
Yeah.
what other people say. I hope people find it interesting. It's interesting to hear from your perspective. I hope people find it interesting to hear mine also as well, being an older boomer or not a, I'm just older and a boomer with some life experience. And it doesn't seem like Gen Z is willing to even listen to boomers right now.
Yeah. Hopefully you feel like I listen to you, but I do
Yeah,
think
no, you do. No, no, you
my
do.
generation,
No,
I
I
do
think you
think,
give great perspective. So I think that's a
yeah,
good thing. So I listen, let anybody comment. You can comment
yeah,
here. We're going to try and grow our podcast. So comment, like, all that kind of fun stuff. And hopefully we can do something to actually move things forward in a positive way that helps everyone. And I guess that's the goal, right?
yeah. I mean, it's a lofty goal, but I guess dream big.
All right. All right, Catherine.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.